All right, good evening, fellow Americans, patriots. The and this was a chart that I'm looking at here that says the U.S. dollar purchasing power goes all the way back to the creation of the Fed to today, and it just talks about how our U.S. dollars lose roughly half their value every 20 years. Wow. And the creation of the Fed, we were told, was to preserve the purchasing power of the dollar. And the thing is that I mentioned it before, 67% of all of the dollars ever created by the United States have been created in the last 10 months. You would think, like a lot of corporations right now, coming out of 2020, they're not looking at doing a lot of spending. They're trying to find where they can save money. What can a dollar get you now? There's so much talking about the need to legislate the minimum wage to be $15 an hour. What would that do? I'm not an economist, but good Lord, I decided not to study that hocus pocus bunch of crap. These might be some of the dumbest people. Yeah, you. If you have an economics degree from some major university, I would love to have a discussion with you face to face. None of it makes sense. Not the last 75 years, anyway. The economics teaching, the people that are running the Treasury and the Fed, these people are either totally incompetent or they're diabolical. I'm going to leave that for you to decide. I've got my own opinion. We're going to try to stick to the facts. Let's get back to the facts. For the last number of years, including this past year and including right now, we heard so much this past year about how we got to get this economy going again. You, elite group, are the one that shut it down. Everybody's hiring. I see Taco Bells, Burger Kings. I see fast food restaurants giving $300 and $500 sign-on bonuses and paying $13 an hour when the minimum wage is $7.25 or whatever it is. Why would anybody need? I'm just asking this question to those really smart economists that are obviously giving advice to President Biden. Why would we need to legislate a $15 minimum wage when pretty much everybody's being offered, just come into work, please show up and just be here. And we're going to pay you $13, $14, $15 an hour. We'll give you $300, $400, $500 signing bonus just to get in here. These are the most remedial beginner jobs. It really is an example of what little bit of free market capitalism we have left, because so much of it is crony capitalism being fed to all of us right out of Washington, D.C., controlling it, right from Wall Street, controlling it all. I look at that and I just think, wow, can we continue to have conversations that is seeking the truth? Why do they keep lying to us? The Lusitania, when it went, or I'm sorry, not the Lusitania. I don't know why I keep thinking of that. But when the Titanic sank, some of the most influential and wealthiest people in America who were against the creation of the Fed died. Was it by accident? Oh, I know what you're going to say. Oh, geez, this has always been proven true. Was it by accident? Or did somebody plan it, let it happen? What about Pearl Harbor? What about President Kennedy? What about the attacks on September 11th? The Office of Strategic Services, I believe it was called, the OSS, during World War II, and then became the Central Intelligence Agency. Our tax dollars support that, and they get a lot of money from other things too. We have no idea exactly what their operating costs are, what their budgets are, what they're involved in. You see little glimpses of it between the Bourne series, Jason Bourne. You see it in Safe House. You see it in movies here and there. You see it Enemy of the State with the NSA and CIA. Conspiracy Theory with Mel Gibson. You get little glimpses of what the truth is. You say, well, that's just in a movie. That's fiction. Orwell was fiction. Now he's actually going to have to be moved over into the historical category. I hope I'm not the only one that struggles to try to figure out why we are letting elected officials make these decisions. How can anybody think that the executive decisions that have been made in the past week are benefiting our country? Because I'd like to know. I feel like the executive decisions that were made in the previous administration, I had a basis that I could say, well, here's the benefits. Here are the benefits. This is how it helps America. And if it helps America, it's going to help the rest of the free world. That's why the citizens in the world look at America and say, yes, keep doing the right thing. In the previous administration, I think they're looking at us right now. This is my opinion. I think they're looking at us right now and saying, what are you doing? I really would like to. Let's take a look at all of these executive orders that have been, and again, they're boastful about how many of them there are. Now I see, and that irony that the Democrats want to expand even more mail-in voting. I want my vote to count. I want you, I want me, I want all of us to be able to stand up and say, I need to know that my vote is going to count. It's not counting. How does shutting down the pipeline? Think about the Keystone Pipeline. This was on the books to be done for many years before. It sat there the whole time Obama's 2 terms. President Trump got it signed in. What does that mean? That means we have lower energy costs, lower fuel costs. If the fuel costs less, that means the grocery costs, the transportation costs of getting the items to the store costs less. My dollar goes farther. Within the first week, the executive order to cancel the Keystone Pipeline. Let's look at this. Byron King, managing editor of Whiskey and Gunpowder. There's something about Biden and pipelines. On November 13th, 1973, a freshman senator from Delaware named Joe Biden voted against building the Alaska Pipeline. On January 20th, 2021, that same Joe Biden, now President of the United States, revoked a permit to build an oil pipeline from Alberta, Canada into the U.S., namely the Keystone XL. Here we have 2 major energy infrastructure projects separated by nearly 48 years, yet both are distinguished by Biden's opposition. Let's look at the 2 pipelines, Alaska and Keystone. In the context of time, history, strategy, energy, the environment, and by what Biden's long-term opposition tells us, let's also look at what it means to you. First, a few words about pipelines. Most of them are buried and out of sight. And the map illustrates here the scope of America's underground pipe grid, courtesy of the U.S. Department of Transportation. And I'm going to tell you, this thing looks more convoluted than the capillaries and arteries in a human body, the nervous system, everything combined. This is crazy how many pipelines are already in existence. Joe Biden may or may not like it, but America is crisscrossed by over 200,000 miles of pipelines. They go everywhere. They carry crude oil, natural gas, refined products. According to the Congressional Research Service, over 70 cross-border pipelines move oil and gas exports and imports between the U.S. and Canada and Mexico. Pipelines are vital arteries. The U.S. couldn't function without this vast system and a multitude of products delivered through an extensive complex of pumps and pipes. The pipelines are how people heat homes, run power plants and factories. Pipes carry fuel for cars, trucks, trains, and airplanes. They supply feedstock to industry, including chemical plants and refineries in Biden's home state of Delaware. All this and much more. Meanwhile, America's pipeline build-out is a product of over 200 years of industrial effort. For example, the country's first pipelines, a series of hollow logs, were laid in 1820 in upstate New York to carry natural gas from bubbling creeks to nearby factories. The first oil pipelines, also made of hollow logs, were laid in West Virginia and Northwest Pennsylvania during the early days of the oil boom in the 1860s. Hollow logs were soon replaced by cast iron pipe, then by steel. And over time, a robust American pipeline industry evolved, which has long been the forefront of metallurgy and technology. It's an impressive story if you get into it. And when you look at that map, there's a green line that illustrates the 1,180-mile route of the proposed, but now canceled, Keystone XL line. If constructed, Keystone XL would carry 830,000 barrels of Canadian oil per day from the heart of Alberta into the U.S. to connect with existing lines that feed refineries on the Gulf Coast. But in a stunt that was as much gaudy showboating as knee-jerk policy, President Trump canceled the project on day one of his administration. What is it with Biden and pipelines? In 2014, former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates published a 640-page book entitled Duty, Memoirs of a Secretary of War. Of Joe Biden, Gates wrote, "I think Biden has been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades." These guys were on staff together. Much of Gates' criticism of Biden has to do with the longtime senator's views on geopolitical and military matters. But take that criticism a step further. Much of America's geopolitical mess from the 1970s to the 2010s, especially many of the country's wars, involved the Middle East and foreign sources of oil. Which brings us back to November 1973 and Biden's vote against the Alaska pipeline. Quick background. Oil was discovered on Alaska's North Slope in 1968. The oil industry wanted to drill up the resource, but there was all manner of environmental opposition. It's how these things go. But between 1968 and 1973, North Slope development was tied up in the courts. Then in October of 73, Israel was attacked and the Yom Kippur War resulted. During the war, the U.S. strongly backed Israel. In retaliation, a bloc of Arab nations embargoed oil exports to the U.S. Almost immediately, the U.S. awoke to nationwide fuel shortages and long lines at gas stations. There was political panic in Washington over the nation's energy security. Do you remember having to wait in a gas line? I do. I was young, but I do remember it. Quickly, the issue of long-term access to assured oil supplies moved from an industrial and environmental matter to a sharp point of national security. National security. That sound familiar? Powerful forces in Washington, that's key deciders, one might say, looked at the North Slope and saw a source of domestic oil that could last well into the 21st century. And it has. Legislatively, the matter was resolved via the Trans-Alaska Pipeline Authorization Act of 1973. The law expedited court hearings on the environmental angle, establishing tight timelines for court action. Those These foreclosed endless cycles of litigation, plus the law-enabled financing, and granted a north-south right-of-way for construction across Alaska. The Pipeline Act breezed through the House. It sailed through the Senate with but 5 votes against it. One of those no votes was a young 30-year-old Joe Biden. Biden claimed that he voted against the pipeline for environmental reasons. Well, maybe so. But despite Biden, the pipeline was built and the first oil flowed on July 4th, 1976. Over the past 45 years, the Alaska Pipeline has transported cumulatively over 18.1 billion barrels of oil. There are billions left to go if oil companies continue to drill in northern Alaska. According to the Anchorage Daily News, the pipeline has generated immense private wealth and pays for most of the state government in Alaska. Looking back, there's no denying that Alaska oil development would have been impossible absent the pipeline. And yes, it altered the environment as well as the sociology of much of Alaska. Then again, all that Alaska oil altered the economy of the U.S. too. Indeed, Alaskan oil likely spared the nation from another war or two, which is just for what we call counterfactual history at the Naval War College. No doubt there are environmental issues with the Alaska pipeline. Leaks and spills happen, which is part of running a complex system. But for the most part, the big issues with the Alaska pipeline are maintenance problems, not environmental disasters. Indeed, the worst problem with Alaskan oil came with the Escon Valdez tanker spill in '89, which was a navigation accident involving a ship and a drunk captain. It had nothing to do with the Alaska pipeline. And the Alaska pipeline owes no thanks to Joe Biden, which brings us back to present day and the Keystone Pipeline XL. And the Keystone XL pipeline. The latest foreign source of imported oil, the largest foreign source of imported oil for the U.S. is Canada. According to the Department of Energy, 48% of U.S. oil imports come from Canada, about 3.4 million barrels per day. Were you thinking maybe Saudi Arabia supplies vast amounts of oil to the U.S.? No. Saudis are a negligible supplier. In recent months, the U.S. has imported exactly 0 from Saudi Arabia. Think about that. I want you to think about it for a second. We really wonder if the Saudis had anything to do with the 9/11 attacks and actually funding some of that terrorist activity. And what we've been able to do by opening up and starting to build that Keystone Pipeline and getting some oil down here, becoming energy independent, making sure that we are taking advantage of everything we possibly can with our own resources. We haven't imported a single barrel from Saudi Arabia. Seems like that is a good move, President Trump. Thank you very much. Much imported Canadian oil already arrives via pipelines across numerous border crossings. In that respect, Canadian oil is no big deal, just one more product of many. And more Canadian oil also crosses the border in trucks or rail cars. The point is, one way or the other, the U.S. imports significant volumes of Canadian oil. The idea behind Keystone XL was to take over 800,000 barrels of oil per day off the roads and off the rails and pipe them into the U.S. Then once in the U.S., and those barrels would simply take their normal place in the U.S. oil refining blend. Right now, though, there's a built-in cost penalty to Canadian oil due to higher shipping rates for rail transport and the handling. The idea behind a new pipeline was to move much of that same oil efficiently, that is, in terms of energy and cost per barrel. Pipelines offer significant savings over trucks and rail. The new Alberta U.S. pipeline is safer too. There's less handling and loading at terminals in Canada, and there's less risk of spillage along the journey south from potential highway accidents or derailment. Indeed, some critics call oil by rail bomb trains. So you might think that it makes sense to build a new pipeline, especially when Canadian money will pay the bill. And many U.S. workers will be employed, while governments along the route will rake in the benefits of the investment. But no, that's not how America rolls these days. According to Biden's executive order that killed off Keystone XL, quote, the proposed Keystone XL pipeline would not serve the U.S. national interest. That is, the significance of the proposed pipeline for our energy security and economy is limited. The United States must prioritize the development of a clean energy economy, which will in turn create good jobs. approval of the proposed pipeline would undermine U.S. climate leadership, end quote. Back to this Green Deal thing, huh? These are not the words of someone who thinks in terms of national security and national interests. There's no strategic discipline in this thought process, marrying resources with goals. President Biden is merely acting out on his environmentally themed, industrial, ignorant campaign promises. He'll boldly lead the country into a Green New disaster. Meanwhile, canceling Keystone XL does not do anything to alter the global environment, let alone improve it. At the source, Canada will continue to produce oil, including from its massive oil sands industry, but now from our northern neighbor has more impetus to complete a pipeline to its Pacific coastline and export that oil to China. And this actually diminishes long-term U.S. energy security. Canadian oil will still move south, just on less efficient trucks and trains, and many of which are BNSF, rolling stock. That's Burlington. That's the railway, whose owner, I quoted him, well, I referred to him. There's actually a quote in front of me by Warren Buffett in Berkshire Hathaway. That's who owns much of the rail that's getting the money from moving it at a much higher price. So all of this heavy crude coming in costs all of us more money at the pump and other places, means our food costs more at the store because we're still using Warren Buffett's rail cars to haul this crude in. Do you think that as a major donor to the Obama administration, he had any influence at all in President Obama's lack of signing the Keystone XL into existence? And do you think that he had any influence at all, being a major donor into Joe Biden's campaign, that he did the same thing? If you have to think about it, exactly. Yeah, there you go. Now you got it. I see you got it. Here in the U.S., homes, transport, and industry will continue to combust hydrocarbons, although, yes, Biden is doing his bit to help along with the long-term deindustrialization of the country. To the extent that the U.S. refiners require heavy oil to blend, they will import from Venezuela or Saudi Arabia if Canadian product is unavailable. And then meanwhile, killing the Keystone XL sends a signal to investors that the U.S. now offers increased levels of jurisdictional risk for large capital investment projects. Deals come and deals go. It depends on how the winds of politics blow. Finally, there's a certain elitism about the whole pipeline cancellation issue. It's out of touch. It's the out of touch Washington class versus the working people of the country. They don't care about us because they don't have to. Again, because my vote doesn't count. They get to keep doing whatever they want to do without term limits. In a circus-like atmosphere, Biden killed a multi-billion-dollar energy project. He eliminated thousands of good-paying industrial jobs with the wave of a hand and a stroke of a pen. Oh, and by the way, if you did not hear it, the muttering of, I don't even know what I'm signing. What am I signing? Did you see that? Then to rub it in, along came Biden's appointee for Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. The former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, testified to Congress about the first tranche of workers, several thousand good-paying union jobs that Joe Biden says he's going to bring back, those good-paying union jobs. And with a stroke of a pen, on the first day in office, he eliminated thousands of those jobs. They lost their jobs because of this politicized mess. And Pete Buttigieg says, quote, "We are very eager to see those workers continue to be employed in good-paying union jobs, even if they might be different ones," end quote. To quote the now infamous, I should say, President, oh, come on, man. From Alaska to Keystone XL, we've seen this before. Political theater overwhelms fundamental national security. Flowery dreams steer policymaking away from reality. Biden and his handlers have assumed power, and they're going to take this country where they good and damn well please. It's going to be a mess. And on that note, Byron King rests his case. I like Byron King. I like Whiskey and Gunpowder. That is an interesting publication that I get. Look at that, 25 minutes later. My apologies for running long. Maybe I can clean these up a little bit. I hope you find that this information that I'm sharing, this worldview, these topics, the perspective in which we have, well, I feel like I'm having these conversations, okay? I feel like there's 51 subscribers out there. I feel like we're having a conversation. Many of you will text back to me. Many of you will reach out to me and say, hey, you give me critiques, this or that. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. I appreciate your time of tuning in and listening. I hope you share it. I really do. I hope we build a community so that we can have conversations seeking the truth. For now, I am James Detroit, and I'm out.